Hello and welcome to Trust Your Glitter podcast. This is Christy and I am here with the astrology of January 22nd through the 28th. I want to just kind of get some dates listed up top because what I'm going to do is actually go into a chart reading. So this week with astrology, we have a very big opener week. There's an awakening happening in society, and this weekend on the 20th, we entered Aquarius season, and we also had Pluto re-enter Aquarius. So with this, we also have a structure of also knowing it's going to be influencing us for quite some time. And this is part of the assignment of 2024, is this grand opening date, I would say, of the 20th. Now, prior to the sun's entrance into Aquarius season, we had the sun and Pluto align at 29 degrees Capricorn, the anaretic degree, and then this entry of the sun in Aquarius, and then later on in the evening, Pluto entered Aquarius. So the influence of the conjunction actually took place very specifically at that last degree of Capricorn. And I know I talked about it on the last episode, but I want to say a lot of what this week is about is recognizing a longer form pattern and also recognizing that, what we're healing is generational wounding, generational trauma. If I record this in the US went through its Pluto return back and forth since about 2020. And so this is long range stuff that we're looking at from a perspective of our lifetime. We're also looking at this from a perspective of other, groups, communities, and even it could be our own family structure. So I want to also point out that the 20th creates and shapes a lot of what this week has, because there's not a lot going on transit-wise. We have the 23rd, Venus enters Capricorn. So the planet of love, the planet of creativity, she's in the Sirius sign of Capricorn. So even though when we're in innovative, forward-thinking, yes, Pluto has re-shown, I don't want to say his, but the energy Pluto is re-showing us something in our realm of transformation and our realm of, how we unzip energetically. Even with that, as we're in Aquarius season, we still have homework to do with the sign of Capricorn. So Venus in Capricorn enters on the 23rd. We also have, which I'm going to discuss even more in depth, a full moon in the sign of Leo on the 25th. And then on the 27th, Uranus is going direct in the sign of Taurus. Now, with a week ending with Uranus going direct, I do find it symbolic. We are in Aquarius season, so Aquarius is co-ruled by the planets Saturn and Uranus. So anytime I see activity in the zone of, say, we're doing Capricorn season, I want to pay attention to Saturn because Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. Now that we're in Aquarius season, I want to pay attention to Uranus and I want to pay attention to Saturn because Aquarius is influenced by both planets. So it is symbolic that here we're entering a new astrological season and Uranus is going direct. With the span of Uranus from August 28th until January 27th, what you kind of want to do is look at what was unexpected. What were the sort of curveballs in your life? Now, there's many curveballs in society, but specifically in your life, really assessing those curveballs. And as Venus actually goes through the sign of Capricorn, because Taurus is also Venusian ruled, you kind of also want to ask, where have your creative outlets been during this time? So what I want to do with this episode is I actually was writing my notes for the episode of the week, and then I meditated on how I was going to approach this. And the download I got was basically cast a chart for the time of the full moon, and instead of going aspect by aspect, date by date, which I'll list the dates after I read this chart, was to actually approach this chart just like I would a natal chart reading. Now, when you read an event chart, you're reading charts in general, but I got this deep download to approach this very specifically like a birth chart. Not saying it's anybody's birthday. If it is your birthday, if you have a baby born at this time, this is a great natal chart reading. But it's something that I feel like I would like to approach it, because when I was looking at the chart, and the full moon chart is January 25th, 2024, 12:54 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this is a full moon in the sign of Leo. When I looked at it, I may have not considered certain aspects to be valid based on an event chart. So I will talk about them because I think it's also important to note, and this will also explain the aspects of the week, because when I look at the dates of the week ahead, yes, we have specific days that certain alignments are square or semi-sextile by exact degree, but I'm actually going to not take into consideration the exactness of something. I'm going to look at a range. So the range that I'm looking for this week is, we're going to feel this energy pretty much the 23rd through the 27th, 28th. So it's kind of like an all-encompassing energy of these aspects. And yes, there are aspects that are going to be separating from one another, but I think that overall, because of the intensity of this full moon, with the nature of Pluto and the conjunction that we had over the weekend, the energy in and of itself can feel intense. And so to just say that a specific date and a specific aspect, like the 20th of January's Cazimi, meaning the alignment of the sun with Pluto, is so strong that it's important to point out like January 20th at this time. But because of that, the full moon is also quite energetic, and awakening is probably the word of the week. So when I look at the word, like when I look at the week, I'm also looking at the fact that, there are pieces of our soul that are being retrieved. There are pieces of ourself, there are pieces of our authenticity, there are pieces of ourselves that we came here to find. And so I'm thinking very long range. And one of the things that has nothing to do with this week, but has everything to do with this Pluto transit. And with Pluto here, in Aquarius, we're not going to have this full transit, this year. Pluto is not fully here and settled in the sign of Aquarius quite yet. We got, part 1, part 2, and then we're getting part 3. And with that, and apologies if I'm slower on this podcast. If you don't like people that talk slow, understand, I'm kind of doing, I did my notes and my back work prior to the podcast, but I'm also approaching this episode as somebody who, I know astrology, enough astrology with many years of practicing. Not the best astrologer in the world, but I'm a passionate astrologer. I'm also approaching this episode as somebody who's extremely appreciative of what astrology is here to do for us. I'm also approaching this episode knowing that there's so much more homework to do as a collective, and, knowing this from an individual basis of this is where I'm sitting with what I know right now and where I'm coming from and where I'm at in my life. And that is what we're kind of being given this week, is this fundamental question of where you are at on a very personal scale also represents where you still have yet to decide to expand your mind on. And this is not going to be an overnight process. And one of the things that I was thinking of is eventually down the road, the North Node, which is right now in the sign of Aries. And the North Node is very much activated this week. So we're going to discuss that too, because the nature of the North Node is very individualistic right now. The North Node is in the sign of Aries. And this year is a very interesting year because as we go through these nodal shifts in the sign of Aries, we're also going to be experiencing, eclipse cycles ahead that represent our personal passion and individual needs. However, the thing that kind of is making me sit and think, it's not just a full moon in Leo that we're experiencing on the 25th. We're experiencing a couple of days after a huge alignment with Pluto, reminding us that, and call back to the 21st of December of 2020, when this was all part of that construct of the great conjunctions. We had our final great conjunction at 0 degrees of Aquarius then. And to me, I see this as a portal point. It's not a world access point, but it is, to me, obviously, I'm not a physicist, I'm not an astronomer, I'm not a mathematician. But to me, if you see these patterns in society play out where we have these great changes, these great alignments, it's time to kind of look at this mosaic, this mandala, this energy and say, this is actually a repeat. We've actually seen this before with these planets. Now it's with these planets. However, make note of what is to come. So I don't know what podcasts are going to look like in the future, but I do know that in 2027, the North Node and Pluto will find their way towards each other. And this is going to be the end of 2027, around mid-November, around the 15th, 16th of November, 2027. And the reason I'm bringing up Pluto to the North Node is just a hunch. It has nothing to do with anything related to what these aspects are doing this week. It's just that, the overall message of, bringing community together, appreciating, the tribes and the ancestors and communities around us, and, the innovations that the internet is, which is Uranian in nature, which is Aquarian in nature, is the idea that Pluto and the sun are asking us to look not just at ourselves, but to look side to side. However, with the full moon in Leo, which can also be like that more royal energy, that kind of old school, like who is the hierarchical leader, Leo's terminology for Leo is, I create, I entertain, Leo is dramatic in nature, really here to take the spotlight, really here and to shine in the spotlight. That is Leo's job. So with a full moon in Leo influencing our week ahead, the energy is just that, can be intense, but with Pluto opposing this full moon. And I'm going to count a couple of things this week. So I'm going to count this as a influenced opposition to Pluto, even though Pluto's at 0 and the full moon will be at 5 degrees Leo. I'm also going to count, and this is why I'm saying I'm treating this like a natal chart. I am going to count that this full moon is in what's called a finger of fate, a yod, or a finger of God. However do you define it? I call it a yod. And the yod would be the apex point being this full moon in Leo, with the fans out, the fingers out to Saturn at 5 degrees of Pisces, and then fan out to Venus at 2 degrees of Capricorn, which means it's a loose sextile between Venus and Capricorn and Saturn in the sign of Pisces. So, would most astrologers consider this a yod? I'm not sure. I kind of try to avoid other astrologers' podcasts or posts unless I'm perplexed on a specific aspect, and I try to make sure if I do have to consult another astrology, other than like Cafe Astrology or Astro.com, where I'm, looking at the ephemeris or charts, I try and make sure that I always cite the source, because every astrologer is coming at this from a different lens. I'm going to come at this from the lens of the fact that I think this yod with the full moon is going to take us on a bit of a path of having to recognize and take note of when, for example, Venus gets to 5 degrees Capricorn over the upcoming days after the full moon. This also points out, I want to take note of when Venus gets to 5 degrees of Aquarius. I also want to take note of a couple other things. So the other influence this week is we have a conjunction between Mercury and Mars, and that is influenced by this full moon. Mercury is in Capricorn and Mars is in Capricorn. Now, this energy also squares Chiron and eventually will square the nodes, not in the conjunction, but it will square the nodes. Chiron is at 15 degrees Aries. And so how I feel this, like when I'm looking at the chart, and this is how I read a natal chart, which is very different from an event chart, is I'm feeling the energy as an individual. So I'm looking at this, I'm feeling the energy as if we as a collective have morphed into an individual and are expressing it through the full moon. So I'm sitting here looking at the chart, looking at the conjunction between Mercury and Mars and Capricorn squaring Chiron and Aries, and I'm feeling that energy. Now, through my notes earlier, I want to see all of these inner planets get to 5 degrees of Aquarius to see where this message is taking us, because it sounds like, when I look at this, it looks like, the download is on hold. The integration is on hold. The soul retrieval is a slow cellular process. So this is very under the surface feelings. It's like some of this may not be risen to the conscious level. So I'm not a huge Savan Symbol person, but I wanted to get a bit of a perspective on what data we could actually understand from this. So I looked at the Savan symbols of 5 degrees Aquarius, 5 degrees Leo, and I'll get to the next one after that. But the Savan symbols give me a lot more data for this full moon. So 5 degrees Aquarius, where the sun is sitting, is a council of ancestors have been called upon to guide a man. And if I were to rewrite that, I would just say to guide society or to guide the individual. So the solar energy has moved forward from that conjunction to the point of the ancestors. And the full moon herself at 5 degrees Leo, the Savan symbol is rock formations towering over a deep canyon. So I think when I'm looking at, what Leo is, which is feline, a lion, the energy of, the curious cat. When you think of rock formations that sit there stately, when the sun rises and hitting that point, the highest point of the canyons, that view of when you see the sunrise. And Leo is ruled by the sun. So when you see that sunrise, that beauty, that majesty, that almost like the look like nature is just being painted by the sun. And as the canyons tower, or as the rock formations tower over that deep crevasse, the abyss, it takes time for the light to get to the deepest part. And so I think that the dynamic between, energy still, we got planets still in Capricorn, this ain't done. Even in Aquarius season, Aquarius gets a weird rep. I don't like how signs just get weird pop astrology reps. Aquarius gets a very weird rep of being like this mad scientist. And I've probably even said it myself when I'm in readings, like trying to give people kind of a more metaphorical analogy of what to even explain for Aquarius, but that's just not true. Aquarius is a wise sign. And I'm going to quote another astrologer. I think I saw this on Threads, but SF Reynolds is an astrologer, and he said that he calls Aquarius winter Virgo. And I was like, that is hilarious. So that is a quote by SF Reynolds. He is an astrologer, I believe, out of New York City. But his quote is very funny because it's very much true. It's like, Aquarius is a fixed sign. Fixed energy, the water bearer, holding the energy. So, I'm in a part of the country where there's a polar vortex. And I was thinking, wow, how Aquarian is this? Like, the air is full of like water particulates that, and the wind is blowing now, but water particulates, and it's so cold and there's just ice on the ground and it's this very fixed energy. It's very Aquarian in nature. The cold, the sharp coldness. But that sharp coldness gives us distance from other people's bullshit. So with the dynamic of the full moon, and full moons are releases and letting go, and the release is tough with this full moon. Because it's timed release. It's restrained release. It's a lot more complex than just like, say, a Cancer full moon that's like, throw all your crap in the ocean and let it wash away. This is saying like you have to get the intellectual understanding here that there are things that just have to take their time, and you have to be smart about it, and you have to really understand all of the different sides to the story. And Leo, and I guarantee a lot of astrologers are going to say, Leo, big, dramatic, this is a big dramatic change. It's like, yes and no. There's a yes and no to this, because if you're having a dramatic reaction, most likely somebody else is using this full moon to their advantage. Does that make sense? If you're having a reaction to somebody else's actions, there's a lot of calculation here. There's also a square. There's a T-square between the Sun and Pluto, the full moon, and Jupiter in Taurus at 6 degrees. So Jupiter is at 6 degrees 42 Taurus. So I looked at the Savan symbols for 6 degrees of Taurus and 7 degrees of Taurus. So 6 degrees of Taurus is a bridge across a deep gorge, which is very symbolic if we think about the rock formations towering over the deep canyon. Because Jupiter's giving us a bridge over this canyon, allowing us to look deeply down into it, but not having to be more like scorpionic about it. Thank God those nodes shifted over. We've been in the Scorpio depths before. And what I think is going on is this is a reflection of the time of that north and south node taking us into the emotional depths. We've been there. Do not go there again. This is actually not supposed to be you like in hysterics. And we're here for it. We're here for emotional processing. But I'm letting you know. And then if you were to count this as 7 degrees Taurus, which it's sort of close by, but not close enough for me, the woman of Samaria at the ancestral well. But I just think it's symbolic because either way, if you're counting this as more of a 6 degree Taurus Jupiter, or let's look at the 7 degree, there is this idea that we're looking into some really deep, old wisdom here. This is even a really good full moon to dig into ancient textbooks, or just go on a study of some sort. Because it could also be somebody tries to push your buttons, but you've gained enough knowledge on that it just doesn't get to you anymore. You've matured past that. And so when I looked at this chart, and I'm looking at it as if it's a natal chart, I'm also looking at the angles of this chart for this time. So the ascendant of this chart is at 6 degrees Gemini. The midheaven is at 13 degrees Aquarius. So that puts the moon in the 3rd house. This is tropical astrology. And that puts the sun in the 9th house with Pluto. So again, this is language. Studying the language of what people are saying. Studying how people are saying things. Studying their intent. What were they thinking? What were you thinking? How can you align yourself more towards your individual purpose? And I think what this week marks is something that's taking us on a long journey of rediscovering the authentic self in order to create a better society. So when that North Node and Pluto find each other, it is looking side to side. Because when you were raised in a society that was ruled by these old school Capricorn ways, patriarchal ways, what it does is it separates you from yourself in order to gain power over you. So I was like really, really in my head about this because I was like, well, what the fuck? Like, Aquarius wants us all to really just get along and vibe. But we can't if we don't know who we the fuck are. There are some people who are born knowing who the fuck they were. Not everybody's on the same spiritual journey and not everybody's the same incarnation. Some people were reincarnated to know where they're at right now, to help other people know where they're at right now. We're all on different parts of the journey. We're all on in different areas. But where one person lacks, the other person has. So if you keep going towards your North Node, your individual self, the recalibration of the collective is actually going to be happening down the road. We're being shown these little signs along the way, like this polar vortex in the United States, around the world. Aquarius does want to look side to side. But an Aquarius looks side to side because they looked within first. That's why when you hear about like Aquarian fashion, it's usually very stands out, very different from what, everybody else is doing. Because the Aquarian is moving the dial forward. The Aquarian is moving us towards our future. So as we're going to experience a lot of conjunctions and squares this week, we have some nice sextiles. Even with the square between Jupiter and the full moon, the T-square, Jupiter is sextile to Saturn. We're here for it. That is saying, hey, you're just meant to sit here and observe. There's something you're going to understand this week. It's going to be slow burning. There's also this sextile Venus is finding her way towards a sextile with Saturn. But it's definitely also saying the letting go of a full moon might actually, I kind of feel like it's going to be like okay, all right, I get it. I see this. Now, on the grander collective scale, with so much going on in the world, with Uranus moving direct, that's where we're kind of in the dark. So there are pieces of this that I really like, but there are pieces of this that, creativity is what gets us through. And what's getting us through is that with this, Aquarius is technically genderless somewhat, but Aquarius is actually the woman holding the woman as the water bearer, the woman as the wisdom. Capricorn is a wise sign, a very serious sign, and we've spent a lot of time with the sign of Capricorn, with Pluto moving through Capricorn, and with all the economic turmoil from 2008. The world has seen the bureaucratic structures being demolished before our eyes, the towers falling down, so to speak. Things take time. So how do you rebuild your tower? How does society take the Tower card in the tarot deck and start, from a place of Mother Gaia, the Empress card? And I also find it symbolic that, this is the year of number 8 as numerology, which is strength, which is the Leo. But we're also going to be entering the Chinese New Year, which is the year of the dragon. So we are in fire breath times, that inner core power. So I really hope this is helpful. I kind of went on a ride just looking at this full moon. Let me just list the dates and aspects of the week because I was just feeling the full moon. We will have Mars quintile Neptune on the 22nd. The 23rd, Uranus is semi-sextile to the North Node. Venus is semi-sextile to Pluto also on the 23rd. So it can be, again, this conflict of creativity, individuality, feeling kind of pulled in different ways. January the 25th, we have Mars exactly square to Chiron. The 26th, we have the Sun semi-sextile Saturn, as well as Mercury square to Chiron. Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus, and the Sun quintile to the North Node, or to both nodes. On the 27th, we have the Sun square Jupiter, Mercury conjunct Mars, Mercury square the North Node. And then on the 28th, we have Venus sextile Saturn, Mars square the nodes, Mercury trine Uranus, very nice. Earthy energy, creative aspects. Probably you're getting that download from that beautiful full moon. And Venus trine Jupiter, again, very beautiful. Loving that they're both in earth signs as well. So those are the kind of exact ephemeris dates, but the way I read the aspects this week is just kind of feeling that full moon chart. So I hope that you have a great week ahead. Take care, and thank you for listening to Trust Your Glitter podcast.